I really believe that out of 10 people, just take 10 people at random, and if you were to ask these 10 people, of course you hear it on the radio more than anything else. Almost every person who is on the radio, I find, these are the popular mediums, not radio alone, but television, and the popular magazines have a set of beliefs that are immovable. Now, and they all believe the same thing. For example, just this is a very rough example. You can always trust a man who has a dog. This kind of thing. Now that's a very rough example. Or things like this. Beatniks wear beards. This is a considered opinion of many of them. And then such things as, I believe that old people should move to Florida when they retire. This sort of, this kind of thing, deep thinking. Things like, I think, I think, by George, I'll tell you what I think. I think that people should read better books. This sort of thing. Very, very deep sort of thing. Or, I think that movie producers have a great responsibility to the youth of the nation. The real, very deep things. And these are all thoughts which are held by all... Of course, the point is that none of them are thoughts at all. These are kind of cant. These are things that people say. Such things as it's very important for many a marriage. One of the things that holds a marriage together is children. This kind of thing. As a matter of fact, they refuse to concede that many a marriage has been broken up by children. But nevertheless, this is the kind of thing that's held. These are very important beliefs that are held. Now, what I'm getting at is this, that you listen to one of these shows, or you listen to people talking like, and you know exactly what they're going to say on any given subject. So this is very soothing to large numbers of people who have no thoughts either, who only believe what they read at the bottom of calendars. And in fact, I had a very frightening call the other day that was not to me, and this is something that should be... I'll just tell you what happened. You can put two and two together. I was in the office here, and there's a lot of telephones around, and I was in my office, as a matter of fact, and there's about 9 different people who occupy that office. Arlene Francis's secretary is in. It's a real menagerie. It's the one place where everybody in the station steers clear of. Ed and Peggy and Fitzgerald. By the way, I don't like to add fuel to a mounting controversy, but the Long John thing that John has been doing about Ed and Pegeen is true. It's very difficult to accept truth in any shape or form. But Pegeen comes in, and I'm in my office back, and it's a funny thing. I wish somebody would come in and record this. I think it's one of the most remarkable forensic tricks of our time, to hear Pegeen in the next room warming up for her radio show. She does both voices. She does the Ed Fitzgerald voice, and she can't get right into it at first. It takes her about 15 or 20 minutes, and the way she warms up is on the telephone. She makes phone calls in the Ed Fitzgerald voice, and the first 2 or 3 calls are very you hear them, and she calls things like information at Grand Central and asks a question, and finally she works into it, and then you can hear it come. It really comes, and then about 3 minutes before the air, she's ready for business. But nevertheless, it's a menagerie. This is a wild, swinging place. So the other day, a phone rang. Nobody's there on one of the desks, which I will not... It doesn't make any difference which one it was. Seeing that the phone was ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing. The operators here have a theory that if you ring a phone long enough, somebody will have to answer. And it doesn't even make any difference who answers as long as it's, just ring, 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 ring. And so it's ringing and ringing and ringing. Obviously, no one is going to answer it who's official or who they want. So anyway, I finally picked the phone up. I said, hello. And there's this Schrapp-type lady on the other end of the line. Perfect voice. She goes, hello, hello. And I could tell it was an angry one. Hello, 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 hello. And I said, hello, may I help you, please? Yes,
I would like to speak to Arlene Francis.
I says, well, Miss Francis is on the air. I'm sorry.
What do you mean she's on the air?
I said, well, she's on the radio now. Can you hear her?
Yes, I'm listening to her. Would you please get her to the phone?
She says, well, madam, how can she be talking to you on the telephone and doing a radio program?
What?
Well, how can she be talking to you and doing a radio program at the same time? She's on the radio.
What do you mean by that?
Well, she's on the radio. You just said you heard her?
Yes, I'm listening to her. And I'd like to... Well, maybe you can help me. Why does Miss Francis, lately, why does she insist on having controversial interviews?
Controversial interviews? What do you mean, controversial interviews?
Well, she's had these WOR used to be such a nice, friendly, family station, and I love it so. But why does she insist on having these controversial interviews?
I said, well, what controversial interviews? Here she's just interviewing some poor guy who grows potted geraniums or something, and I'm listening to it, and I said, what are you talking about, madam? And the speaker is playing in the corner, and she goes on, she says,
well, I don't know why she insists on having controversial interviews.
Madam, may I ask you what you mean by controversial?
What did you say?
May I ask you what you mean by controversial?
You don't mean to tell me you believe the way she does, do you?
Madam, I don't believe any way. I'm merely asking you what you mean by controversial.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to turn the station off and never listen again.
Oh. Well, apparently controversial means the way she doesn't think. Isn't it interesting that anything you disagree with is controversial and anything you agree with is right? It's fascinating. I'm sure that to Hitler, the subject of gas ovens wasn't controversial at all. Obviously. It's a very strange thing. It's an interesting phenomenon. And so I believe this, getting back to the subject of the discussion here, that there are certain set of beliefs that are held by what appears to be the majority of the people. Now, these beliefs, invariably, I have found, are based almost totally on an emotional absorption of some kind of viscous fluid that the person grew up with. There's nothing to do with thinking. These are not thoughts, they're beliefs. Believe me, there's a great deal of difference between thought and belief. In case you're interested, look up idea and then look up belief. Two different things entirely. And so when somebody says, I believe so-and-so, that does not mean he has thought about it. Most people fight thinking tooth and nail because when you start thinking, then you run into all kinds of terrible deep shoals and dark waters beyond which lack of knowledge, misinformation, plain stupidity, everything else starts getting in your way. So it's much easier to believe things. I believe so-and-so. That's all. Hardly anyone thinks past it. And interestingly enough, we even base a great deal of our testing systems on these beliefs. That a person who believes these things is generally considered by the people who do the testing, vocational testing and all that stuff, as a more stable person. And these are in capital letters. A person that is more fitted for the job, capital letters. Now, to give you an idea, a kid here says to me, he sent me a letter. I don't think I have enough time. How much time do I have? 2:59. Oh, well, that's all right. A kid sends me a letter, see, and he says, Shepard, he says, I'm sitting in this idiotic high school out in the suburbs, and he says, and they believe in testing. Not testing you on your subjects, no. They believe on constantly testing you on your aptitudes and various things that they call your skills and abilities. These are all in capital. They never test me on arithmetic. They're always testing me on other things. And he says, and after you've taken about a dozen of these tests, you know the answers that they want. There are multiple choice questions like, what would you rather be? A streetcar conductor, an advertising executive, or a bum? And if you say streetcar conductor, obviously you're in the second rank already. And he says, he says, and after a while you get so that you automatically can answer them all. You can either get 100 by answering them all, and if you answer them truthfully, he says, you're bound to be in trouble all the way down the line. And he says, I am sending you under separate cover an exact copy of one of the tests. He says, this is a test that has to do with vocations. He says, read these things and then think carefully about it. He says, here, for example, is one of the things they ask you. He says, here, what people, he says, you're supposed to say, which of these people do you like the most? Which do you dislike the most? Check the one that you would most rather be with, the people you'd most like. Average, that's one type of person. Queer-looking people with unusual ideas. Do you notice they couple unusual ideas with queer-looking people? Queer-looking people with unusual ideas or carefree people. He says, obviously, you're supposed to underscore average. Carefree people are dangerous. Queer-looking people with unusual ideas, oh, terrible stuff. And he says, what am I going to do? He says, I happen to like people with unusual ideas. He says, so he says, no, I know better than to underline that one. Just and they go on and then they ask me these questions like this, he says. Here, these are ideas for various jobs and so forth. He says, what would you rather do? Have friends, have power, have fame? Which would you underscore there? He says, well, everybody secretly wants power. That's what they want. He says, but you're supposed to underscore have friends. That's very important. He says, and everybody knows that isn't what you want. And then there's another one. He says, what would you rather be? A piano tuner, a school teacher, or a dentist? And he says, half the kids I know would love to be a piano tuner. He says, I don't know one kid that would like to be a dentist. He says, most kids, school teacher, maybe. He says, but what you're supposed to underscore is dentist. He says he knows this. Work in a candy factory, keep bees, or give eye examinations. And so there's a whole series of things. And if you ask anyone these things, speaking of a whole series of things, this is old Friendly Shepherd. I'll be back in 15 minutes following the news. We get this call from this friendly type school teacher. So, well, Mr. Shepherd, the child should underline the things he really believes. No, madam, you've missed the point. The point of the discussion is he knows the things that he really believes, but he also knows another thing that all of us know, and that is that one is judged and graded by these tests. You are put in different categories, and that's in capital letters. And there are more desirable categories than others. Admitted, baby? We all know that some categories are preferred to others. What my young correspondent was saying is that everyone secretly knows the things you're supposed to answer to be put into the preferred categories. And if you deny this or argue with it, I refer you to a book by William White, Mr. White, who was one of the editors, I believe still is, one of the editors of Fortune magazine. What was the name of the book? Now, I wish I read the thing a couple of years ago, and it was an interesting sociological treatise on the business world today. Protestant, by William White. Now, come on. It's in the same general category as the current popular socio-economic books by Vance Packard, but this was far more scholarly and in many ways had more humor. Mr. Packard writes with no humor whatsoever. William White, what's the name of his book? Come on. It was a compilation of articles that ran in Fortune, and one of the chapters was on test passing. And he was saying, look, forget about the test. His general attitude was, you know the correct answers that they want, the ones that they want you to answer. Regardless of what you believe, answer them. He says, because this is the way the system is. His general feeling was, this is the system, and since it is the system, you have to work within it. And since you have to look out for your own leaky rowboat, answer these questions this way. And he had a whole series of tests, the way that the categorizers wanted you to answer them, and almost all of them were completely based on a concept of bright, placid optimism and friendly mediocrity. And by the way, this is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. This is called generally putting up a front. And the putting up a front technique is as old as the hills, and it's only recently been codified and put into test form. As a matter of fact, the kid goes along and he includes a few more of the other questions. He says, He says, get this one. What would you rather do? Advise people on personality improvement, catch rare animals, or cash checks? He says, as though they're all mutually independent. He says, I happen to know some people who would like to catch rare animals, also at times like to advise people on personality improvements, and they love cashing checks. He says, what a ridiculous question. He says, and as a matter of fact, most people who catch rare animals enjoy cashing checks inordinately. And he says, and he happens to know many people who advise people on personality improvements whose whole business is to cash checks. He says, now how are you going to answer that question? He says, so if I write cash checks down there, immediately I'm put into a second-rate category. He says, I know it. He says, if I put catch rare animals down there, he says, does that ignore the fact that I also like to tell people about their personality problems? He says, so which way do you go on these ridiculous questions? And then and listen to this one then. He says, listen to this one here. He says, now, what would you rather do? You're supposed to check the one you'd rather do. See, he says, belong to a discussion group for problems of modern life. He says, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, I think I would like to belong to a discussion group for modern life. Belong to a literary discussion group. Yeah, I'd like to do that too. Belong to an astronomy club. Yeah, so I'd like to belong to all three of them. But I'm supposed to check the one I would like to belong to. He says, apparently they believe that people who are interested in astronomy are not interested in modern life, nor literary discussions. And conversely, people who are interested in literary discussions are not interested in modern life. He says that makes no sense whatsoever. He says it's totally nonsensical. And he says, and this is a test that was given in one of the big high schools in suburbia here. He says, and the kids are based on this. He says, all kinds of things are put in your record on the basis of this. Then he says, here's one here, he said. Now listen to this one. He says, this is a jazzy one. He says, choose which you prefer. Now listen. Put advertising circulars in cars passing a street corner. No, he said, I don't want to do that. Count cars going past the corner at different hours. No. Direct traffic at the street corner. No. I don't want to do any of them. He says, now what do you do? He says, I got to check the one I'd rather do. He says, do I want to stand out there and be a cop, direct traffic? No. He says, do I want to put ads in the cars? No. Do I want to count the cars? No. He says, now how am I going to check? He says, I got to check one. He says, and if you check none of them, it comes back and says, please check. You have missed one here. He says, and if you don't answer one, then you're put into a terrible category. Then you're really you're one of those odd-looking people, going back to question 7, odd-looking people with unusual ideas, and you're one to watch. He says it's like putting you between the devil and the deep blue sea half of the time, and the other time they say, which would you rather have? Would you rather be in love? Would you rather look at the stars? Would you rather drink a chocolate mullet? He says, all three of them are great. He says, I'd like to, at any one given time, he says, people seem to, in these tests, have a single-mind attitude towards everything. Listen to this one, then. What would you rather do? Write a newspaper column on current events, collect garbage, raise chickens. He says, it's obvious which one you're supposed to answer. He says, this is ridiculous stuff. He says, and serious people write these tests. And serious people grade you on these things. He says, it just is a fantastic thing. Now, listen to this. Here's the one. You get a question of this one. Listen. Do you want to read about famous men and women? Read writers' descriptions of an ideal world. Read about the lives of early pioneers. He said, for one thing, he says, they have nothing in here about novels. He said, they don't even mention reading novels. He says, do I want to read about famous men and women? Yeah, sometimes, if it's well written. He says, do I want to read writers' descriptions of an ideal world? Yes, sometimes. Except that many writers write descriptions of like, say, 1984. Or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. How do you handle that one? He said, I happen to have liked that. He says, read about the lives of early pioneers sometimes. He says, now I'm supposed to check which one I want to read about. He says, now the idea, of course, is that he knows which one they want him to check to get into the right categories. Yes. Would you like to catch rare animals or advise people on personality problems? Quick. Come on. I want to answer. Quick there. Here's one. Now, here's another hard one to answer here. You're given a choice here. Work in a candy factory. She says, no, I have no desire to work in a candy factory. Keep bees. No, I don't want to keep bees. Give eye examinations. No. Now what do I answer? I don't want to do any of those. All right. And then he says, here's a doozy. He says, give this one to the average daily news reader. This is one from the field. Have friends, have power, have fame. He says, I want all three of them. Now what do you answer? See, you notice they're all mutually exclusive, that if you have friends, you can't have power, nor fame. If you have power, you can't have fame or friends. And if you have fame, you can't have any of the others. He says these things are like Alice in Wonderland. And the people seriously grade you on these. They're very serious. All right, children, today we're going to have a half day off. It's the PA system, at 9 o'clock. Says, we are going to have a half day off. The senior class will be taking the aptitude tests, which are given bi-yearly. The senior class, section 2, will file into the auditorium at 10:17. The rest of you will stay in your study halls until the completion of the test, which will be at 11:45. At which time there will be a 5-minute intermission, and then Section 1 will file in for their test. Section 2 will then return to their study halls. After the completion of the test, we ask you do not discuss the test with your neighbors. Do not discuss the test with your neighbors. That is all. This is Mr. Watanabe, the principal. And the very serious people are giving these serious things. Which would you rather do, old man? Come on, Harry, listen. Which would you rather do? Teach arithmetic? Teach dogs tricks? He says, I know an arithmetic teacher who has 3 dachshunds. He says, now, how's that guy going to answer that one? Or be the secretary of a congressman? He says, now, I suppose if you mark be the secretary of a congressman, that shows that you're interested in important affairs. And if you mark teach arithmetic, that means you're an intellectual. If you want to teach dogs tricks, slob. He says, I happen to know 2 congressmen secretaries who teach dogs tricks and who used to teach arithmetic. Oh, yeah, well, we've got an almost insane desire to categorize things. And I'll tell you how insane it is. That one of the big listings magazines, that list things for television viewing, do you know that they refused to list my television show for weeks on end for one reason? They wouldn't put it in. They would just say, to be announced. And the reason they wouldn't was because I refused to tell them a week in advance what I was going to talk about and the punchlines of all the gags that I was about to put on. Have you noticed whenever you look in one of these little TV things that says, be sure to watch Loretta Young tonight. Bob Hope pays a surprise visit to her. Oh, boy, it's such a surprise. When Bob Hope pays a surprise visit, he comes in cleverly disguised as a Franciscan monk and completely fools Loretta Young. After that, they are visited by her idiot cousin from Circleville, Ohio, who also is disguised, this time, as a good humor salesman. All the disguises are discovered in the last act, and Bob unveils himself as old Bob Hope, and everyone is surprised. It's such a surprise. Be sure to watch this surprise tonight. Well, I mean, are the people who read this thing, are they surprised then when it happens? Or else, have you ever noticed how they describe a movie? Jeffrey Lynn meets Priscilla Lane in this thrill-packed, wonderful movie that was given 2/3 of a star by the Daily News in 1938. Jeffrey Lynn is a test pilot, and for a long while it looks like Jeffrey Lynn is doomed. However, there is a happy ending as the two of them finally make it in the last scene, and Jeffrey lands his battered Spad on the field, accompanied by the cheers of Barry Fitzgerald, her old elderly uncle who designed the airplane. What is this, And we have an insane desire not only to know the answers before they're given, but also to categorize everything. And, of course, this is learned very early in school. I mean, kids are always asked to categorize things. Which do you like better, writing book reviews or standing on your head? It's kind of mutually exclusive, but nevertheless somehow coupled. And it's all part of the interesting tag thing. Tag, put a tag on it. Put a tag on it. Believe me, you know why most of the comics who work on television and radio, why most of them have to have canned laughter, is because if they didn't, people wouldn't know it's funny. They have to be told it's funny. And so if you were to see, let's say, the Danny Thomas show, have you ever wondered about these people that are doing family comedies and they're in their living room? I mean, they're in the kitchen, the living room, and you keep hearing people go, where are these people sitting, supposedly? In the bedroom, watching them, laughing? Well, the reason that they have to have the canned laughter is because the comic realizes that if he didn't have this, nobody would know what category to put him in. And if he's categorized as comic, then people will laugh. If he isn't, that's where my, people never know. I get letters from people constantly. Dear Mr. Shepard, I have to tell you a terrible thing, but the other day when you were talking, I had to laugh at what you had to say. And she's apologizing.